Amy Coney Barrett, the conservative, right wing Christian fundamentalist judge who Donald Trump is basically trying to have appointed to the Supreme Court as we speak, had something very interesting to say about how she would rule on same sex marriage when asked by the Senate during the Senate confirmation hearings. And here's what she had to say: I have never discriminated on the basis of sexual preference and would not discriminate on the basis of sexual preference. Now, this is a very interesting statement, and it got a lot of criticism for obvious reasons. She uses the term sexual preference, which is indicative of homosexuality being a choice, totally consistent with her right wing Christian fundamentalist views, but not consistent with any science and psychology or the biological sciences or the testimonies of people who are actually in the LGBT community. So that comment of hers rendered a response, numerous responses on Twitter, one of them from Glad saying this: the correct term is sexual orientation. Sexual preference is a term often used by anti LGBT activists to imply that sexual orientation is a choice, right? That was one response. Lambda Legal had this to say on Twitter: Barrett used sexual preference, not sexual orientation, when discussing her views on marriage equality. This is a dog whistle. The term sexual preference is used by opponents of equality to suggest that being LGBTQ is a choice. And then lastly, George Takei had this to say: it's not a sexual preference, Judge Barrett. A preference is something you choose. I'll give you an example. I have a preference for non radical, non fundamentalist justices on the Supreme Court. Are we clear? And so I said that that was the last example, but there are many, many more after that. And so she obviously got a lot of criticism for what she was saying, and in particular the phrase she used and what it implied. And so I posted this to my Facebook page, and a friend of mine, or an acquaintance anyway, objected immediately. He said, "This is stupid. She's apologized for what she said." Did she? Did she really? I looked up what he said to just to see if she actually did issue an apology, and there are numerous news outlets reporting that she has in fact apologized for what she said. But this was her apology. Quote: I certainly didn't mean and would never mean to use a term that would cause any offense in the LGBT community. So if I did, I greatly apologize for that. That's not an apology. That's not an apology. I'm sorry if you're offended. That's not an apology. That's basically what she said. So, let me give you an example of some valid apologies that she could have used. This would be a valid apology. I'm sorry, I misspoke. What I meant to say was that sexual orientation was the thing that I'm talking about, not sexual preference. So it was a poor phrasing of words, and I apologize for the confusion. That would have been a valid apology because she's acknowledging that it's not sexual preference she was talking about, but actually sexual orientation. Here's another one. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that the term sexual preference could be taken to imply that sexuality was a choice. I certainly don't believe that sexual orientation is a choice, so I apologize that I used that term sexual preference. That would have been a valid apology too. She didn't do either one of those things. She said, what did she say? I certainly didn't mean and would never mean to use a term that would cause any offense in the LGBT community. First of all, the term is irrelevant. What's relevant is what you mean when you're using a term. And so it's the message you are conveying. People that use that term are usually conveying a specific message. So if that's not the message you were trying to convey, you should correct yourself and correctly state the message you were trying to convey. That's the first problem with her apology. The second problem is in her second sentence, she says, so if I did, I greatly apologize. It's not a question of if you did. We're telling you that you did. You used incorrect terminology that implies it's a choice. That's not in question, right? So she's not taking any responsibility there. So it definitely wasn't an apology. I actually would have been more impressed by her, or at least less offended, if instead of apologizing for what she said something like this: you know what? I don't apologize for my Christian faith. The Bible clearly teaches that sexuality is a choice and that homosexuality is a sin. However, as we live in a secular constitution, I will never allow my religious beliefs to impact my judgment on the Supreme Court. I recognize that all Americans, regardless of sexual orientation or identity, have the same rights and the right to fair treatment under the law. This includes marriage rights, the legal right to adopt, the legal right to serve in the military, or the right to identify as gender of your choice. That would have been impactful. I would have accepted that. And that's not even an apology. She's not even apologizing for what she said because she honestly believes that sexuality is a choice. So, don't apologize for your true position. You should be apologizing for doing something wrong. If you view what you said was wrong, that's the time to issue an apology. But she doesn't, which is why I don't like her. And I'm kind of picking on her, but I'm really doing this just to kind of make the broader point that people should not issue insincere apologies. Only apologize if you mean it. If you're just apologizing to save face, that's an empty apology. It's a non-apology to say that I'm sorry if I've offended you, but you don't actually regret the thing that you did, or you haven't actually changed your position at all. So, I want to go over what she said one more time because this is the part that really gets me. If I did, I greatly apologize. If you're acknowledging that you actually did something wrong, which is required by an apology, if you're not acknowledging that and you're only suggesting that it's possible that you did something wrong after people tell you that you did, then you're not taking any responsibility for what you said. You're acknowledging no wrongdoing, which makes it an empty apology. And so I just needed to clear that up. I'm actually going to go to the dictionary definition of apology. You ready? An admission of error or discourtesy accompanied by an expression of regret. And so, in common parlance, that's how the word is used. You require those two elements for it to be an apology. She's missing both. So therefore, it's not an apology. I think Google has a simpler definition: a regretful acknowledgement of an offense or failure, right? So that's what an apology is. It's not "I'm sorry if you're offended" or "if I might have said something that you find to be offensive." No, that's not an apology. "I'm sorry if you're offended" is basically the equivalent of saying "I'm still right and I hope you can get over it soon." Nah, bitch, that ain't how this works. Don't tell me you apologize to me for offending me and then continue to offend me. As an LGBT person myself, I do not accept Amy Coney Barrett's apology. If she doesn't want to offend me, then she should acknowledge that sexual orientation is not a choice and take back what she said. Until she does that, she's offending me, and therefore her apology is not accepted. And here's words of wisdom for anyone who's tempted to say sorry, not sorry, because that's essentially what she's saying here. Never apologize merely because someone else is offended by you. If you are going to apologize, if you are going to offer an apology for anything that you've done, then you should be apologizing for being offensive and then stop being offensive. If you can't do that, then your apology ought not be accepted, because you're unwilling to acknowledge that your position or your statement or your behavior was wrong. If you're not willing to say that what I did was in fact wrong, then don't waste your time offering an apology. Nobody cares.